Hi, I'm Rachel, a resource expert and career coach for museum educators who are stretched thin but long to fall in love with their world-changing work. After over 15 years with my own hands in the glitter, I know how it feels when your board thinks your work is childish because you work with children. I know how hard it is to lead a tour on a difficult subject, and I know the frustration of waiting on a school bus that is 20 minutes late. Or worse, 10 minutes early. As I'm heading towards the second half of my career, I find myself with a passion to help my fellow educators reverse the chronic state of being overworked and underappreciated so that they can reclaim their creativity and emotional energy. Join me and my museum buddies as we share our best tips, tricks, and techniques for modern museum education. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Modern Museum Education Podcast. My name is Rachel, and I'm your host. So as I'm recording this, it is currently the springtime here in North America, and I have really grown to love spring. It wasn't always my favorite season, but as I have gotten older, it has become my favorite season. And I think it's because spring is so full of possibility in a real grounded way that, like, the New Year's season, for example, is not. To me, New Year's is a great time for thinking about big pie in the sky dreams and the aspirations that you have. But, it happens in the middle of winter, which is, for me, I really, of course, like I said, I live in North America. January time, the beginning of the year, it happens right in the middle of winter, which is a time for hibernation and kind of hunkering down and not taking risks and not actually taking a lot of action. That's like the energy that winter has for me. It's a time of the year where I spend a lot of time just being, not really doing a whole lot. But in the spring, as things start to grow and they bloom and they sprout, it just feels like there's an energy of growth. But it's all very small and like baby leaves and little flower buds. And it's all this just kind of early spring buzzy excitement that really gets my active juices flowing. So it's no surprise that here in the spring is when I finally couldn't take it anymore and I had to just get back up on the horse and record a new podcast. If you have followed my work at all, I put out, I think, maybe 7 podcast episodes in 2023, and then all of that came to a screeching halt at the end of the summer when I went back to school. So I don't know if you know this, but getting a PhD is it's no joke. It is a lot of work. And I went back to school to get my PhD at the same time that we had a big family kind of change in our lives. And anyways, life in the last 6 months has been kind of bonkers in my house. And, the podcast was just kind of put on hold. And a lot of my big plans and dreams and goals for the modern museum education space were also put on hold. And I was doing some smaller work and really leaning into my schoolwork especially. But with this new season, I have, now a semester and a half of school sort of under my belt. I have kind of figured out the rhythm for how to keep up with my coursework. And I'm feeling like I have a little bit more capacity in my life to restart a lot of the things that I kind of teased last year. Because the thing is, I so deeply believe in the power of museum education. And it makes me so, so sad to see my fellow museum educators getting burnt out and leaving the field, or just sort of phoning it in at work. That just breaks my heart. And I have such a passion to advocate for the work that we do in museums, specifically with children. So I've done a lot of, while I haven't been really active, out on the interwebs with modern museum education, and I haven't been putting out a podcast, I have been thinking so much about what it is that our field is and can be and should be, and what we need. And a lot of this is informed by the work that I am now doing in my PhD. So I'm not sure if I really talked about this much before, but I've gone back to school to get a PhD specifically in educational leadership and policy. So it's a sort of broad interdisciplinary education degree, but my research is focused specifically on education in the museum space. And that research and that work, it is lighting a fire under me, even more so than before, when I was just sort of thinking about going to get my PhD in this. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity to speak on a virtual panel for the EMP network for emerging museum professionals. And it was all about the sort of the experience of being an IMP, an independent museum professional. And as I was putting together my thoughts to speak on that panel, I was reflecting a lot about my motivations to get into independent museum work. And I was personally motivated internally and externally. And I think I may have talked a little bit about this in some of the earlier episodes of my podcast about what, kind of what drove me towards wanting to do museum education consulting and my vision for what that can look like. And, really, I was so driven by this desire to dive deep into the theory behind what we do in museum education, why we do it, how it can be better, how it can be easier, how we can advocate for the resources that we need. I was really on fire for this. And over the years, over the last, I would say probably like 4 years of my time working full time in a museum, just increasingly every day, I felt a pull to work with museum education in a broader context. So not just inside the four walls of my institution, but in the wider field. So as I was thinking about my motivations and what it is that I want to do and why I want to do it and why I'm so passionate about museum education consulting and why I'm so passionate about educating museum educators about the work that we do, and all of these thoughts are kind of swirling around as springtime is emerging and there's this kind of shift in the energy of, around me. I'm not feeling like I want to hibernate all the time. I'm feeling like I want to get out and I want to do things. And so I've really been thinking about how I can create the space with the resources that I have. Like, what is my capacity right now? And as I was thinking about this, like a mantra came back to me that I heard, I don't even know where. You've probably heard it. It's said a lot. I think I've heard people talk about it on podcasts. I think I've probably read about it. But the question is, what if this was easy? And I kind of went back to all of my big plans and goals and dreams and aspirations for the independent work that I'm doing, for elevating the field of museum education, for my PhD, for my family, and trying to fit all of those pieces into, the box that is the shape of my life. What if it were easy? What if I could do these things in a way that freed up a little bit of space and time? What if it was easy? What if it was fun? And so I went back kind of to the drawing board to think about what if it were easy? And I realized that what I really, really, really love to do, I do love to write about museum education, but to be honest, I'm writing about museum education a freaking lot. Every week I'm writing pages and pages and pages for school. I can't blog about museum education right now. I simply cannot. But I really do love putting out the podcast. But, I had some voices that I was listening to last year that said, if you're not doing a video podcast, there's no point. And I didn't have the capacity in my home to put together a really nice looking video podcast. And so I tried to kind of bootstrap it, and I was never really happy with the results. So that's another reason why I kind of stopped doing the podcast, because I didn't love the output. So as I was sort of thinking about this, I thought, well, how can this be easy? It can be easy if I just forget the video part, because the way that my life works right now, I'm not often in a position or a place where I can put out a nice video podcast, but I can put out a nice audio podcast. So I thought, why am I making this harder? I'm going to make it easy, and I'm going to do what I can within the capacity that I have. So that's just one example of how I'm taking action now, inspired by the springtime growth, to get back to what it is that I really want to do, which is to support museum educators. So as I was thinking about this, I thought, well, okay, how would this apply to me? Like, how would this message have applied to me if I was still a full-time museum education director? So I have 3 tips for embracing springtime energy and taking action. Number 1 is to avoid a full-on systems reset. I am the absolute worst about wanting to replan everything that I've already planned, because somehow planning feels like productivity, but for me it often becomes productive procrastination. So I am consciously trying to avoid resetting all of my systems. I actually put a lot of really great systems in place for myself last fall and over the winter when I started school and realized that my capacity for work had shrunk considerably. What I didn't do was take action on those systems. I set them up and then just kind of looked at them. I didn't actually use them. I did not work my plan. So I am recommitting to working the plan that I have already set up. I am not going to redo all of my systems. I'm going to work the systems that I have in place. And then as I find things that could be tweaked, of course I'm going to tweak them, but I'm not starting from scratch. That is not what this is about. I think that sometimes we confuse starting small and starting over. And I don't think that you always have to start over. Sometimes you totally have to start over. And I've been there. I have started completely over more than once. But this moment, for me at least, is not a moment for starting over. This is a moment for starting small, taking the good foundation that I have and just taking action. Which leads me to my second point. And my second point is, what am I overcomplicating? How can this be easy? As an education director, how could I have stopped overcomplicating things? Well, for one thing, I would be kind of feast or famine, all or nothing when it came to tracking metrics. I never tracked my metrics in terms of the number of students I was seeing, the number of teachers I was seeing, the number of different schools, the number of repeat schools, the amount of money we were making, the amount of money we were spending. I would set up systems to track those, and then I wouldn't use them. And then I would go backwards and try to track 6 months of metrics all at once. And that was so complicated, and it was literally the worst thing. Anyone who's ever worked with me can attest to this fact. I would store all of my receipts for the entire year. I would store them in a single file folder, literally just pile them up. And then the museum where I worked at, our fiscal year began on July 1st. So I had to have all of those receipts filed and organized before the audit. And, maybe if our CFO had pushed a little harder and been a little bit more like, you have to have these in every month, I would have done it. But I didn't have that external accountability, and the only external accountability was it had to be in by the end of the year. So I would put off doing this until the very end of the year, and I would have to take an entire week and spread out receipts over my whole desk area and sort them into months and take the credit card statements. And y'all, it was such a nightmare. And every year I kicked myself for doing it, and every year I did it again. And if I would have stopped overcomplicating it, if I had just taken the action when I should have taken it, it would have just completely turned it around. And part of the reason why that I put it off is because I complicated it. I had this complicated spreadsheet. I didn't really need to know how much money, for me, I didn't need to know how much specific money I was spending on this one specific supply. What I really should have been tracking was just how much was I spending on this program, how much was I spending on this program. If I had thought about it and if I had asked myself, how can I make this simpler? I could have done it much more efficiently and much more effectively. I could have gotten the answers I needed without all the extra work. So that is the question to ask. What are you overcomplicating? What do you actually need, and how can you actually make it happen? For me, I actually needed to put a podcast out. I didn't need it to be a video podcast. I just needed it to be out there. So here it is. When I was doing budget reports, I didn't need to know how much money was actually going to construction paper. I just needed to know how much was going to supplies for this one particular program. And so eventually I did sort of settle into a less complicated budgeting system, but even still, I never quite made that a good habit. And that's a sort of a different problem. But the question here is, what is one small thing that you can do to make the work you're doing easier, even if it feels at first like it's a little bit inferior? Maybe it's not exactly the way you want it ultimately. You can always grow forward when you start small. And the third point is to just be bold and do it messy. Embrace that messy action. For me, that means pushing myself out of my comfort zone, putting myself out there. Maybe for you, it means getting honest about what demographic audience is not coming to your site and asking yourself why. How can you reach that audience? But remember, how can you do it in a way that is not overcomplicated? How can you do it in a way that is simple to start? I think also sometimes when we think, how can this be simple? We believe that we are settling. But I'm not encouraging us to settle. I'm encouraging us to start small, start simple, give ourselves a runway, give yourself a place to grow. I was just talking with my husband about this because he does a lot of creative writing in the RPG space. And he was just talking about how there's a tendency sometimes to want to fill in like all the gaps of a story all at once in the beginning before the story actually takes off, but that what you really need to do is just paint with a broad brush and leave yourself space to grow your story. And I think that is also true as we're running education departments. Give yourself space to grow. You don't have to have a program that is completely sold out the first time you launch it. You don't have to have the most perfect classroom space. You don't have to have the most elaborate gallery interactives. But you can have something. How can you make it simple? How can you work within the capacity that you currently have? So that is my encouragement to you today, is to just start small. There's nothing wrong with starting small. That's another lesson that I think we can learn from the springtime. Everything in the springtime starts small. All the little baby animals that are born in the spring are baby animals. All the little flowers are buds. All the grasses are just sprouting. All the leaves are just little bitty tiny baby green leaves. Everything in nature starts small. There's nothing wrong with starting small. And if there was anything I wish I could go back and tell myself in 2016, when I inherited an education department that was kind of in shambles, I wish I could go back and tell myself, it's okay to start small. It's okay to make it simple. It's okay for it not to be what your be-all, end-all dream right now. It's okay to spring clean this, to get rid of the cobwebs, to just wake everything up, take small steps, baby actions. And that is essentially what I am doing now. So I am kind of restarting the work that I began last year with Modern Museum Education, with the podcast. So let's all take our cue from the springtime. Let's recognize that it is now time to grow and no longer time to hibernate. So we're going to put hibernation time aside and we're going to take action on the things that we want to take action on. But when you're taking action, ask yourself, how can this be simple? How can I make this easy so that taking action is easy and doable and then done? How can I take those messy actions, those baby steps that aren't maybe where I ultimately want to go, but they are just the small steps? Like, what if this were easy? And what if it could be fun? And so here is to embracing this early spring buzzy energy and making big things happen. Thank you so much for joining us. If this episode has been helpful to you or interesting, please take a minute to like, subscribe, and leave a review, which will help other museum educators find this resource. As always, if you would like to work with me more directly, have any questions, or would like to be a guest on the podcast, you can find links to all that and more on my website, modernmuseumeducation.com. I'll see you back here next time, and in the meantime, please remember that your work is not childish just because you work with children.